is by Hanson Lenyoun. All right. Now, Hanson works with a company called Vessyl. Actually, the company's called Mark I, but they make a product called Vessyl, the Vessyl Pryme. And what it does is it is able, it's a cup that is able to track your hydration. So you know how hydrated you are, you know when you need to take your next sip of water, you know, and all this is based on your activity as well. So it's a really interesting piece of technology. I've actually been using it myself over the last week, and I probably would be in prime, what they call state of hydration, if I haven't been drinking all night. But all right, let me get your presentation started.
Get a head start since it wasn't feeling a little longer than it was.
What's the view shot? What's it? Oh, I see. Oh. Look at that. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Great. All right. What's up? Hi, everyone. How's it going? So, as George said, my name is Hanson Lenyoun, and I am with Mark I, head of health there, and it's kind of like a sort of hybrid medical director role. And before that, I sort of come from a background of surgical training. So my job previously consisted of cutting people open and worrying about their hydration status. So we're going to talk about one of those tonight, and since it's not body hacking, I guess you can probably imagine what it is. Guessing it's the other one. All right, there we go. So we're going to talk about hydration today. So we'll do a little bit about kind of some scientific background on hydration, talk a little bit about that high school biology stuff that you all have probably forgotten, talk about some interesting research that's going on in the space right now and kind of debunk a lot of the pop culture hydration facts that you may hear, and talk about what it really means to be hydrated optimally. We'll tell you a little bit about our product and what we're working on in the space at Mark I, and take some questions. Go from there. So hydration, most important nutrient, right? Really easy to forget. We get busy, meetings, running around answering email, getting sprayed in the face by garden hoses. You know, all these things distract us from focusing on hydration, which is a very important topic. So to kind of go back to that sort of beginning, why is it important? Why does it matter? What happens with water? I wanted to take you through this. Probably looks a little familiar. This guy up on the left shows us that we've got 60% of our body weight, which is water. The other 40% bones, organs, cells, all that sort of fun stuff, right? But it's a big part of our body, so little changes in that can make a big difference. In terms of what happens when you drink a glass of water, it goes into your GI system. Not exactly accurate there anatomically, but close enough, and gets absorbed into your system, where 65% of it ends up intracellularly, meaning it's within the cells, moving things around in your body, responsible for all those things that cause your cells to function properly, to get where they need to be. And then the rest of that is extracellular, meaning it's in the interstitial fluid between the cells, transporting things from cell to cell, and within your blood, right? So it's the plasma, the liquid component of the blood. So important stuff, right? It's good to take a moment and think about, oh yeah, that's why we need this stuff. In terms of what the kind of goal state is, we talk about euhydration. Not hyper, not hypo, but perfectly sort of at the right spot. That's what we mean by that. And euhydration, I'll just read this for you folks in the back there too. So it's the optimal amount of water contained in all the compartments of the body, vascular, intracellular, and extracellular, as well as the optimal amount and timing of water intake to allow maintenance of electrolyte levels and facilitate ideal digestion, excretion of waste, toxins, and other optimal cognitive and physiological functions. So the net is you've got to have the right amount of water, but you also have to be replenishing that, right? You're constantly losing water, so you have to constantly be taking water in. And it's about taking that water in at the right time and in the right quantity that we're really interested in. It's not that easy. So all of these factors are things that contribute to your hydration status, right? So things like your age, sex, weight, height, things that are static or relatively static, depending on the week, right? Those are all different for each of us. But then there are things that change moment by moment too, right? Or even day to day, things like how much you sleep, how much you're exercising, what your activity level is at baseline. All these things are very variable and they impact your hydration status. So it's a little more complicated than just, let's figure out what it is and meet it. Great example. So Nick Barnes, who's here from Mark One, our CEO, loves to use this example of Shaquille O'Neal and Taylor Swift. Two very different people, and yet we say, oh yeah, you should totally drink 8 glasses of water, right? You're fine. Probably not. I mean, this probably isn't exactly to scale, it might be, but a little bit of size difference between the two of them. So to suggest that they should drink the same amount of water is pretty ridiculous, right? What about if we even think of this? So Shaquille O'Neal, going up there, dripping with sweat, having a crazy game, versus him on Inside the NBA, sitting there in a climate-controlled environment in his very ugly jacket, but not really doing anything strenuous. So same person, same height, same age, all that sort of stuff, different days, different activities, very different needs, right? So how do we actually then figure out what we need? Shouldn't somebody have made a recommendation on this? So when we talk about recommendations, the thing we all kind of click to is the side of the cereal box, right? And that's our recommended daily allowance, RDA, which is over here on the left side. It's a little comic strip. I'll read it for you guys that are in the back there. The woman in the back is saying, if you read the back of the cookie box, do you know how big a serving size is? And the guy is saying, what, a sleeve, 2 sleeves, 6 boxes, however many it takes to fill the length of an adult human esophagus. And that's kind of the way we think about RDAs sometimes, right? It's I don't really know how big a serving size is, but I'm going to guess it's about this. Turns out that's kind of also the case for water. So the National Academy of Sciences, which is the sort of governing body that makes the RDAs, actually looked at this and said, we don't really know. We can't really do this for water because it is so variable. Everybody has such different needs, and there's so many different factors that contribute to it that we can't even actually make an RDA. So what they said instead is we're going to come up with this idea of AI, or adequate intake. And what adequate intake is essentially, if you drink this much, you probably won't die of dehydration. Probably. Yet we still have, over 500,000 hospitalizations every year due to dehydration alone, and 2% of those people do die. So it's actually not a great measure. But what they did is they actually looked at the median intake of people across the country in terms of how much water they actually drink. So kind of an interesting way to come up with a recommendation by saying, what are you drinking now? You should probably still drink that. But that's kind of the best they could do. And what they came up with actually ends up being 2.7 liters for women and 3.7 liters for men. But that includes all of the water that you get from food. So if you think about the standard American diet and subtract that out, what you're left with is 2.2 liters for women and 3 liters for men, which is 9 cups and 13 cups. Sorry, you can't see the one there.
Any idea what that is in ounces?
So, ask me to do a lot of math here. No, yeah, that'll be a trivia question for later. How about that? Okay. But yeah, so this is the adequate intake recommendation that they've come up with. And so one of the things that a lot of the kind of water calculators out there don't take into account is this fact that you also get water from food, right? That's where a lot of things get kind of off, get messy. Male, female, ages, all these things contribute, right? So you hear all these different recommendations all the time, right? This is kind of the gold standard one, but there are a lot out there. So how do we know which one is right? And so, 9 cups, 13 cups, that's not 8 cups. Where did 8 cups come from, right? Truth is, we don't actually know where 8 cups came from. There's a couple theories. So the best one that I've heard is you can actually go back to the medical literature in 1921 and look at a paper where a scientist measured his output for an entire day. So basically he peed in a cup for a day, and it ended up being 8 cups. So his theory was, if I pee out 8 cups, then I should probably drink 8 cups to replace the losses, right? And that's where 8 cups probably came from. Nothing scientific really around it. 1921, again, a lot that we can do now, many, many years later. This is an exciting time, right? We've got all these fantastic sensors available now, some of which we just saw from our friends from Enflux, and we can start using this data in very interesting and powerful ways. And a lot of those kind of variables that we showed you on that slide with all the factors that influence hydration are now measurable, trackable. changeable over time too, right? And you can integrate them into other things. So the way that we think about these hydration needs from a very static perspective is pretty antiquated, and it's changing. And so what we're trying to do as a company is disrupt that and come up with a way to have a product that helps you actually know what you need in the moment. So our first product is Pryme Vessyl. Got one here for you guys too. And it's an intelligent cup, obviously, that helps you calculate and track your unique hydration needs moment by moment as they change throughout the day. So it pairs with wearable fitness trackers, Apple Watch, Jawbone, Apple Health, and allows you to then pull in things like that activity data, sleep data, things that impact your hydration needs, as well as then actually tracking what you're consuming, so you can track how you're doing in terms of meeting those needs over time. So as those needs change, you have an idea of where they're going and what you can do to meet them. And that's represented through this line here on the side of the cup. You can see if I tilt there. It's essentially a 0 to 100% scale. George was mentioning this before. If it's at the top and your blue light is on, we say you're at your prime, which means you're at that place where you're meeting your needs 100% of the way. And when you're at your prime, we like to say you're cognitively sharp and physically strong. And that gets into some of the benefits that we like to talk about with hydration. So before I kind of talk about the kitchen sink here, which is really what it is, because again, going back to those first couple slides, your body's 60% water, like it impacts everything, right? So when you're dehydrated, everything as a result is impacted. Before I say that, I want to say there's a lot of really interesting research being done right now on hydration. And over the past 20, 30 years, to be totally honest with you, it's been very well studied. There's been a lot of fantastic stuff you can imagine coming out of the sports science institutes around hydration, but it hasn't been able to be applied at this individual level until now. And so a lot of these things, mental balance, physical endurance, like we think about the gym and getting our workouts in and making sure we're optimally hydrated for that, but going to work every day is just as important, because being dehydrated there can have just as big an impact in a very different way. Things like weight management, more energy, better skin, immunity, all of these things are related to how hydrated you are. And even with decreases in your hydration status of 1 to 2%, which is actually before you start to feel thirsty, you can notice severe sort of limitations or impact in different areas like this. I'll tell you a little bit about one of these areas in more detail. So mental balance. These are just a few studies that have been done in the area around kind of mental health and its association with dehydration. It's a really kind of hot topic area right now. A lot of people are doing research on it. Things like mood, so how balanced your mood is, even things like cognition, how well your short-term memory works, how awake you are and alert you are, all comes back to hydration. So with, again, subtle decreases in your hydration status, 1 to 2%, you can notice severe impact in people's ability to really function cognitively. And this is something that's important to all of us. We may not all be running marathons, but we're all like going to work and trying to focus on things and want to be mentally sharp when we want to be. One other thing that actually just came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago now is a study out of the University of Arkansas, which actually looked at endothelial function in dehydrated patients or people. And so endothelial cells, are those cells that line your blood vessels. You probably hear about it a lot in terms of heart attack and stroke. They get inflamed and cause those things. And what these researchers looked at was when people were very mild to moderately dehydrated, so 1 to 2%, again, they saw impairment in those endothelial cells that was similar to smoking a cigarette. So really kind of amazing, right? Everybody's on this whole sitting is the new smoking thing. Well, now being dehydrated is literally the new smoking. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff that's coming out from a research perspective around hydration and what it's related to. And this is really only the tip of the iceberg that we're talking about, because we're only talking about hydration right now. But our mission as a company is to actually influence a lot more than that, right? So we want to create desirable products that engage, inform, and empower you to make healthier choices. And so that's not just around hydration. So for some of you that may be familiar with us, as George mentioned, we also have a product that's in development called Vessyl. And Vessyl is kind of taking Pryme Vessyl to the next level. So Pryme is one component of Vessyl, but Vessyl is focused on nutrients in general. So not just water consumption and meeting your prime, but consuming all sorts of different nutrients. So Pryme is that middle top one there, staying hydrated. It's an important piece of that. But we're also interested in tracking how many calories, how much sugar, how much caffeine. How can this impact a lot of different things that you might be interested in tracking in your life? And for the standard American who drinks 500 calories a day on average in beverage form, this can have potentially huge ramifications, right? If you're trying to lose weight or cut out sugar or whatever the case might be. It's something that beverages are a very kind of low-hanging fruit. But that's not where we want to stop either. So there are possibilities way beyond that. Again, we think about the solid food realm. We really want to be the automatic consumption tracking company that does all of this. And this is kind of our first step into the market. So we have several Pryme Vessyls here with us today. There's going to be one we're going to give away to you guys later on. And we've got a couple at one of these tables over here that I'll hobble over to after and be there with Nick. So if you want to come check it out, please come say hello to us and see it. We've also got some with us if you're interested in buying one. They retail for $99, but we're going to give you guys $10 off or $15 off tonight. We also have a promo code that we've given to George to post up as well too to get $10 off if you want to buy it online sometime in the next week before Friday. And lastly, they are available at the Apple Store if you want to go out and buy them live in the retail environment. So with that, I'll leave a little time for questions. All right, let's go around the room. We'll start over here.
Hi. Are you familiar with Tim Noakes? Possibly. I mean, many people would argue the most famous, well-known exercise physiologist over the last 20 years. So he's written a book called Waterlogged, where he makes the argument, at least for endurance exercise, that actually all of the stuff about dehydration is basically invented by Gatorade, and your body knows how much you should drink when and where, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing, right? So there's a couple things to unpack that for those of you guys that couldn't hear the question. It was around there's a school of thought out there that your body knows when to hydrate, and you should just follow your body's sort of messaging around that. And then also the key in on endurance athletes and how hydration levels kind of impact their performance. So I'll address those separately. So the first one around kind of your body's ability to understand hydration. So thirst is a great thing, right? And a lot of people bring up this can't I just drink when I'm thirsty and that's fine? But it's actually a really complex physiological mechanism, right? And with all complex things, it has a lot of downfalls. So the equivalent I like to make is if we only ate when we were hungry, then 70% of America wouldn't be overweight or obese, right? So if we understood how to listen to our body's signals and responded appropriately, then we'd be in a very different position. So that's kind of the first issue, is that a lot of people don't know what thirst feels like. People often mistake thirst for hunger and eat instead. So there's some complexity there. The other thing is that thirst can be tricked quite easily. So there was a great study that was done about 5 years ago where they took marathon runners and had them sip and swish water and then spit it out, so they didn't actually swallow any. And they were able to sort of inhibit their thirst mechanism until they were 5, 6, 7% dehydrated, and they didn't feel thirsty at all, because they were having that feedback of having water in their mouth. Their hydration levels were totally off, right? Their status was they were very dehydrated and they weren't feeling any thirst. So you can manipulate it that way. You can manipulate it the other way too, right? So things like stress, getting up in front of a large group and speaking, things like that can make you thirsty. If I give you a spoonful of salt, you're going to feel thirsty, even though it has no immediate impact on your hydration status. So there are a few things around kind of your body's mechanisms and how you deal with them. And then there's just the fact that we're busy, right? So, I mean, how often is it like 3 or 4 o'clock and you realize you haven't eaten lunch and you're thirsty, you haven't had anything to drink all day, you haven't been to the bathroom in 8 hours? Happens to me all the time, So having a reminder like this is something that is very beneficial, because we do know that even 1 to 2% before you might be feeling thirst, you're seeing impacts in your performance. In regards to...
I was just going to ask, isn't it true that that when you're feeling thirsty, you actually are already dehydrated?
So yeah, it's again complex, right? So physiologically, it's usually around that 2% mark, that 2% dehydration, where thirst kind of kicks in. but it's complex, right? So again, it's a very complex physiological thing. So it's different for different people, different times. But that is generally kind of a rule. But then to go back to also the endurance athlete piece. So our idea isn't that you're going to be running a marathon holding this, right? So a little clunky, not exactly the goal here. So there is definitely a whole boatload of physiological data around kind of endurance athletes, strength athletes, what you do kind of in the middle of the game, right? All that sort of stuff. And that's not something that we're trying to sort of replace with this. This is much more general consumer, who am I? Like, I'm going to work and I'm worried about my hydration. I want to perform better and I want to be at my prime, so I'm ready for those moments when I need to be sharp. That's where we really want to focus on making a difference.
I'm just wondering, there's all this research, there's been a lot of research for a long time around the benefits of fasting and food. Have you seen anything to indicate that the same effect might hold true for water? That it might be beneficial in any way to, periodically have a lower hydration level and then come back up?
Yeah, so there's been no sort of longitudinal, long-term research on water fasting and that showed benefits, I should say. So the only things that we're seeing are things like inflammatory responses, like the study with the endothelial function, and then kind of all of the sort of cognitive stuff that comes along with it. There's really interesting stuff that's done in the military on this, where they have kind of basic training recruits that are deprived of everything really for a long period of time, and then they see what happens. And there's been no benefit that's ever been shown for fasting.
One more question.
So you measure quantity of the water people drink. Do you also think that the quality of the water affects your performance, cognitive function, etc.? What's in your water as far as the contaminants, the minerals, all that stuff, chlorine? Do you have any data or any plans to address that?
Yeah, definitely. So the question was around water quality. What's in your water impacting you as much as how much you drink? And that's absolutely for sure a thing, right? So with this iteration, so Pryme Vessyl, we're not actually looking at the contents of what's inside that you're drinking, but that is what we want to focus on in the future with Vessyl, so the product that we have in development, where we'll actually be looking at what it is that you're drinking. So having a whole different set of sensors that take a look at, are there contaminants, what's the content, because there is a lot of really interesting research around even things like alkaline level versus acidity in water, mineralization, things like that, and how it plays into the different status of your hydration level, as well as your kind of SF alkalinity and things like that in your body as well. So it's all connected for sure. One more.
Oh, yeah.
What about heartbeat NO2 level from biosensors like smartwatches and things that are coming out, playing a role in making, at least as an indirect indicator of hydration, at least especially over time,
Definitely.
Statistical analysis of individual versus.
Yep, absolutely. So
is that something you're looking for?
For sure, yeah. So I think the great thing is that as these sensors get more robust and more kind of omnipresent, we can connect to them and we can get that data from them, right? So there's fantastic data at the kind of, N of one scientific study sort of level on how these things impact physiology. What we can't do is, take those readings for all of you in the room without throwing you in $3,000 worth of medical equipment for the moment. So as the sensors get better and cheaper and more ubiquitous, we can take all that data and make those recommendations based on it.
So is there a mobile app right now?
There is a mobile app, yeah. So it syncs through.
So in the future, you're going to definitely be iterating and adding a lot of connectivity to other third-party sensors.
Absolutely. So as the data becomes more available, we'll use it. That's for sure.
Product.
Question, just last one, sorry, George. How does HIPAA play into this when you're doing the connectivity?
Yeah, so we do not ascribe voluntarily to HIPAA regulation at this point because we're not sort of transacting any medical data back and forth. But it is something that if we wanted to get into sort of like the wellness space, like what Fitbit is doing at the moment, it's something that's worth exploring for sure. It's a different set of considerations, and it's a much kind of it's a very different strategy in terms of approach. So
now you're a point solution if you were to be a platform like we have.
it depends on the utility, right? So right now we're very much focused on consumers and making sure people are able to get to their prime. If we wanted to kind of get to that sort of research, medical institution, like that kind of level, it's something we will consider at the right time. Yeah.
Thanks.